Jack Miller never expected his ordinary drive home to shatter his world. On a dusty Oklahoma road, he spotted a skeletal horse swaying under a dying oak tree. But when the animal lifted its head, Jack froze. The hollow eyes staring back were all too familiar. This wasn't just any horse. It was Red, the champion partner he had entrusted to a safe retirement years ago. What Jack uncovered next would expose a betrayal far larger than his own heartbreak. The Oklahoma sun beat down like a furnace, painting the land in shades of gold and rust. Jack Miller squinted through the cracked windshield of his old pickup truck as it rattled along the dusty red dirt road. The smell of scorched grass and the drone of cicadas filled the air, a symphony of summer that he knew by heart. Jack had spent his entire life on this land, planting, harvesting, and wrestling with the unforgiving seasons. He was heading home from the farmer's market, the bed of his truck half empty, when something unusual caught his eye. Up ahead, behind the sagging fence line of an abandoned property, stood a figure that made his chest tighten. He slowed, the tires crunching over gravel, and leaned forward, trying to make sense of what he saw. At first it looked like a shadow against the dying grass, a skeletal form too thin to belong to anything alive. But then it shifted, swaying beneath the shade of a lonely oak tree, and the shape became clearer. It was a horse, ribs jutting through skin, its head drooping low as though every breath cost too much effort. Jack pressed his foot hard on the brake, and the truck shuddered to a halt, sending a plume of red dust spiraling into the hot air. For a moment, he sat frozen, his hands gripping the wheel. He knew that posture, that outline. It was etched into his memory from a lifetime ago. His heart hammered as the thought forced its way forward. Impossible, and yet undeniable. No, it can't be. But even before he stepped out, Jack felt the old wound tear open inside him. He shoved the door wide and stumbled into the heat, his boots crunching the brittle grass. The horse lifted its head weakly, and despite the sunburned coat, the hollow eyes, the trembling legs, Jack recognized the spark of familiarity. The world tilted beneath him, memories colliding with the present. "Red," he whispered, the name catching in his throat like it had been buried for years. The horse shifted slightly, ears flicking at the sound, and in that tiny gesture, the years collapsed between them. Jack gripped the fence rail with shaking hands, staring at the living ghost that had once been his partner, his pride, his champion. The silence stretched, broken only by the cicadas and the soft, uneven breaths of the starving animal. Jack's knees nearly gave way. He had dreamed of Red in the quiet nights, always imagining him running strong and free in wide pastures. That had been the promise, the retirement he had been assured when he handed over his companion years ago. Yet here stood the truth, wasting away under an unforgiving sun, abandoned in a field where no one cared enough to look. The cicadas quieted for a moment, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Jack stepped closer, his throat tight, his mind racing. He reached a hand out, palm trembling in the heat. The horse blinked slowly, then took a shaky step forward. And when its muzzle brushed against Jack's fingertips, the years between them vanished in an instant. Jack's breath caught as Red's muzzle brushed his fingertips, a faint, dry warmth that carried the scent of dust and neglect. The years seemed to fold back on themselves, and for a moment, Jack wasn't standing in an abandoned field under the Oklahoma sun. He was 25 again, the roar of a rodeo crowd in his ears, the power of this same horse coiled like a spring beneath him. Red had once been the picture of strength, a sorrel stallion whose muscles rippled with energy, whose stride could leave competitors choking on dust. But now, standing before Jack, the proud animal was nearly unrecognizable. The horse's eyes, however, had not changed. Clouded with exhaustion though they were, those dark orbs still held the depth Jack remembered, the keen intelligence that had always set Red apart. Jack stepped closer, slowly, careful not to startle him. He could see every rib, every jutting bone beneath the matted coat. The horse trembled, as though each heartbeat threatened to knock him from his feet. Jack swallowed hard, trying to fight back the lump that rose in his throat. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice breaking against the heavy silence. "It's me. It's Jack." For a brief second, he thought he imagined it, the way Red's ears tipped forward, the faint flick of recognition. But then the horse leaned his weight into the air between them, nostrils flaring as he caught the familiar scent. Jack pressed his hand against the side of Red's neck, feeling the rough tangles of mane, the ridges of bone beneath skin that had once carried power and pride. His chest ached with guilt. This was supposed to have never happened. Red had been promised a dignified retirement, lush pastures, good feed, and kind hands. Jack had trusted others to keep that promise. Now, staring into those familiar eyes, he knew the truth. Red had been abandoned. The cicadas started again, their rattling call filling the stillness, but Jack barely heard them. Memories surged unbidden. Long nights spent training in the arena, Red's hooves cutting sharp against the dirt, the two of them moving like one creature. The smell of sweat and leather, the way Red would toss his head after a successful run, as if he knew he'd just outperformed every horse in the pen. Jack remembered leaning down, patting that same neck, whispering praise as the crowd erupted. And now those eyes, once lit with fire, reflected only pain and resignation. Jack tightened his grip on the fence post, fighting, to steady himself. "What did they do to you, old friend?" he whispered. He wanted to scream, to rage against the silence, but Red only shifted his weight, legs wobbling like they could give way at any moment. Jack looked around the field, scanning for signs of food or water. A rusted trough sat dry near the collapsed barn, weeds growing up through its cracks. The ground was scattered with brittle grass, no nourishment for any creature. Jack's jaw clenched. This wasn't just neglect. It was abandonment in its cruelest form. A sound behind him startled him. Jack spun around to see a woman standing a few yards away, leaning against the sagging fence. She was thin, her sun hat frayed at the brim, and her arms carried the wiry strength of someone used to hard work. Her eyes, shadowed beneath the hat, held both sadness and recognition. "You know him, don't you?" she asked, her voice carrying a rasp from years under the sun. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, his name's Red. He was mine once." The woman shifted her weight, glancing toward the horse. "I figured he belonged to someone who cared. I've been slipping him water when I can, bringing a little hay from my place, but I can't keep up. He's been here for months, and no one else comes." No one but me. Jack stared at her, then back at Red. Months. The word dug into him like a thorn. He stepped closer to the fence, gripping the top rail. "Why? Why is he here?" The woman reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, tarnished tag, the metal glinting weakly in the sun. She held it out, her hand trembling. Jack took it and turned it over. Stamped into the surface was a faded logo. Silver Creek Retirement Ranch. the letters blurred as Jack's vision swam. That was the very place he'd trusted, the very people he had paid to care for Red after his rodeo days were done. The memory of the glossy brochures came back to him. Horses grazing in green fields, words like dignity and lifetime care printed in bold letters. It had all been a lie. Jack closed his hand tightly around the tag until the edges dug into his palm. He looked back at Red, who stood motionless, head bowed, the faint light of trust still flickering in his weary eyes. "I'll get you out of here," Jack said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I swear it." The woman nodded, as though she'd been waiting to hear those words. "If anyone can, it's you." Jack reached for Red again, his hand steady now, his voice filled with a promise he intended to keep. "Come on, old friend." "We're going home." The woman shifted closer, her boots crunching against the brittle earth as though the ground itself might crack beneath her. Jack studied her with the cautious curiosity he reserved for strangers out here in the open country. Her skin bore the deep lines of sun and sorrow, the kind that comes from years of both weather and grief. She carried herself with a quiet resilience, as if life had beaten her down, but hadn't managed to break her. The brim of her frayed straw hat shaded her eyes, but when she looked up at him, Jack saw an honesty there that cut through the oppressive heat. "My name's Clara Johnson," she said finally, her voice slow, almost hesitant, as if speaking too loud might scare the horse away. "I've been keeping an eye on him." "Best I could." Jack turned back to Red, who stood swaying slightly under the oak tree, the sun catching along his dull coat. He still couldn't reconcile the memory of his proud rodeo partner with the ghost standing before him. He cleared his throat, rough with dust and emotion. "How long has he been here?" Clara's shoulders lifted and fell with a sigh. 8 months, maybe more. I found him wandering near the creek last winter. Looked half dead then. Didn't figure he'd last through the cold, but he did. Strong-willed, this one. I thought maybe someone would come looking. Nobody did." Her words landed like blows, each syllable stripping away another layer of the illusion Jack had clung to. He remembered the glossy brochures from Silver Creek Retirement Ranch, the carefully posed photos of horses grazing on endless green pastures, the promises of comfort and care. He had believed them, paid for them. And yet here Red was, skin stretched tight over bones, abandoned on a forgotten patch of land. "Why didn't you call someone?" Jack asked, his tone harsher than he intended. Clara narrowed her eyes but didn't bristle. Instead, she looked tired, as though she had already asked herself that question 100 times. "I did," called the sheriff, called animal control, even called the number on that tag. She nodded at the piece of tarnished metal still clenched in Jack's fist. "Disconnected. Sheriff said they didn't have the facilities for a horse. Animal control told me the same. So it fell to me. I've got a small place of my own, goats mostly, and I brought what hay I could spare. Hauled water in buckets. But a body can only do so much. And I'm just one woman." The weight of her words pressed on Jack like the heat pressing down from above. He glanced at Red again, who stretched his neck weakly toward the sound of Clara's voice, nostrils flaring as if to acknowledge her efforts. Jack's throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell anyone else?" he asked, softer this time. Clara gave a small, bitter laugh. "Folks around here mind their own business. Some don't care. Some don't want to get mixed up in trouble. And make no mistake, there's trouble tied up in this horse. I seen the way those trucks drive slow along this road at night. I hear engines when the stars are out, see headlights sweep across the fields, then vanish. He's not just some forgotten animal, Mr. Miller. Jack Miller, he said. She nodded. Well, Mr. Miller, Red's survival, it's not by chance. Somebody wanted him gone, and somebody else wanted to make sure no one noticed he wasn't where he was supposed to be. The air between them thickened. Jack could feel it, the unspoken threat, the shadow hanging over everything. He looked down at the tag again, tracing the faint letters of Silver Creek with his thumb. His gut twisted. They promised he'd be cared for, he said, more to himself than to her. I paid them to give him the life he deserved. Clara crossed her arms. And yet here he stands. Sometimes money doesn't buy care. Sometimes it just lines someone else's pockets. Jack exhaled hard, his chest aching with anger and shame. He had trusted strangers to do what he should have done himself. Red had given him everything: strength, loyalty, victories. And when it came time to return the favor, Jack had walked away with a signature on a contract and a false sense of peace. Red shifted again, his legs trembling as if the effort of standing was nearly too much. Jack reached across the fence, laying his hand against the horse's cheek. The skin was warm, but lacked the vibrant energy he remembered. Still, Red leaned into the touch. That simple gesture reignited a fire inside Jack. "I'm not leaving him here," Jack said, his voice steady now, filled with a promise carved deeper than any wound. "Not another day." Clara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you mean that, you'll need help. He can't walk far, and whoever left him here, they won't like you poking around." Jack met her gaze. "Let them come." "I won't back down." The cicada's song swelled again, buzzing in the silence that followed, as if the land itself approved of his vow. Clara pulled her hat lower against the sun and glanced back toward the dirt road. "There's more to this than one horse, Mr. Miller. Red's the start, but if you look deeper, you'll find others. They don't want you to find them. That's why you have to, Jack, let her words settle in his bones." The promise he had just made wasn't only to Red. It was to every horse that had been betrayed by the same hands. He tightened his grip on the fence rail, feeling the rough wood bite into his palm, anchoring him to the moment. "We start with him," Jack said firmly. "We get him safe. Then we find the rest." Clara gave him a look that mixed respect with sorrow. "Then you'd best be ready for a fight." Behind them, Red gave a faint nicker, a sound so weak yet so full of recognition that both Jack and Clara turned toward him. For the first time since Jack had pulled his truck to that screeching halt, a spark of hope flickered in the air. Fragile, but real. And Jack knew. This was only the beginning. Jack's old pickup rumbled down the narrow gravel road, the trailer clattering behind it like a tired ghost. Inside that trailer, Red stood swaying, too weak to protest, his ribs visible even in the shadows. Jack drove slowly, each bump in the road sending a pang of guilt through his chest. Clara had helped him load Red with a patience that came from months of quiet caretaking, and now the horse was finally leaving that forsaken place. But as the red dirt road stretched ahead, Jack's mind drifted far from the present. He remembered the first time he laid eyes on Red, years ago, when he was still a restless young man chasing glory in the rodeo circuit. The horse had been barely more than a colt then, nervous energy wrapped in muscle and fire, his coat gleaming like copper under the stadium lights. Jack could recall the sharp smell of the arena dirt, the electric buzz of the crowd, and the way Red's ears twitched, listening to the world like it was daring him to run. He had felt something in that instant, a spark, a recognition that this animal was different. Their first ride together had been chaos. Red had bucked and twisted, his strength a raw storm, but Jack had stayed with him, not by overpowering him, but by listening, by letting the horse's rhythm guide his own movements. When they finally settled into stride, the arena erupted. Jack had leaned down, whispered, "That's it, boy." And in that moment, man and horse had found each other. It was a partnership that would carry them across countless arenas, through dust and sweat and the deafening roar of thousands of spectators. The memories spilled in sharper images. Red cutting hard to the left, dust rising in sheets as cattle spun and stumbled away. Jack gripping the reins, his muscles straining, yet always trusting Red's instincts more than his own. He remembered trophies, photographs with forced smiles, the press of hands congratulating him. But more than all of that, he remembered the quiet moments afterward, brushing Red down in the stall, the horse's warm breath against his arm, the way Red would nudge him gently when the night grew too long. Those were the moments that mattered, the bond that trophies could never capture. The road jolted the truck, shaking Jack out of his reverie. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. Red's condition now was a cruel betrayal of everything they had been. He had trusted Silver Creek Ranch to give his partner the rest he deserved. A green pasture to roam, a place where dignity would replace the dust of competition. Instead, they had left him to starve, forgotten like yesterday's headlines. Jack pulled the truck onto a ridge overlooking his farm. Below lay acres of parched fields, a barn weathered but standing strong, fences that needed mending but held their shape. It wasn't paradise, but it was home. His home. He shut off the engine and stepped out, the air thick with the scent of sun-baked soil. When he opened the trailer, Red barely shifted, his legs trembling but his eyes fixed on Jack. For a long moment, man and horse regarded each other, the silence saying everything words could not. "Come on, boy," Jack said quietly, coaxing him down the ramp. Red hesitated, then moved, each step a struggle. Jack walked alongside him, one hand on the lead rope, the other hovering close in case Red faltered. When they reached the barn, Jack led him into a small stall lined with fresh straw. The horse lowered his head, sniffing at the ground before collapsing gently onto the bedding with a sigh that seemed to carry years of exhaustion. Jack leaned against the stall door, his eyes burning. He had promised himself once that Red would never be forgotten, that his years of service would end in comfort. Yet here they were, starting from nothing, scraping hope from the edge of despair. That night, Jack sat outside the stall on an old wooden stool, the dim light of a lantern casting shadows across the barn walls. He watched Red's chest rise and fall, uneven but steady. The cicadas sang their endless tune outside, but in the barn there was only the sound of breath, fragile but present. Jack thought of the arenas, the crowds, the glory that had once seemed so important. Now all of that felt hollow. The only thing that mattered was here, within reach, lying in the straw. He reached through the slats and laid his hand gently on Red's shoulder. "We'll get you through this," he whispered. "I won't fail you again." For a fleeting second, Red shifted, his ear twitching toward Jack's voice, and Jack felt the faintest flicker of the old bond. It wasn't victory, it wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. Outside, the horizon glowed faintly with the last light of day. Jack sat in silence, memories swirling with guilt and determination. The past was unchangeable, but the future was not. Tomorrow, he would call Marcus Lee, the only man he trusted with Red's fragile life. Tomorrow, the fight to restore what had been broken would begin. And Jack knew as he listened to Red's weary breaths, that he wasn't just fighting for one horse. He was fighting for every promise ever made between man and animal. Morning light spilled across the Oklahoma plains, painting the fields with the pale gold of a new day. Jack leaned against the stall door, eyes gritty from a night without sleep. Red had dozed fitfully, his breaths uneven, every rise and fall of his chest a reminder of how fragile his condition had become. Jack knew he couldn't handle this alone. He needed someone who understood not only the science, but also the heart it took to bring an animal back from the edge. There was only one man he trusted for that: Marcus Lee. Marcus had been his best friend since they were kids, back when they'd raced each other bareback across the county fairgrounds. Life had taken them in different directions, Jack to the rodeo, Marcus to veterinary school. But their bond had held, even through years of silence. Now, as Jack scrolled through his old contacts and pressed the familiar number, he wondered if that bond could still hold after everything. The phone rang twice before a warm, steady voice answered. "Jack Miller, I'll be damned." "Been a long time." Jack's throat tightened. "Too long." "Marcus, I need your help." "It's Red." There was a pause, sharp and immediate, as though Marcus had been jolted from miles away. "Red? Jack, I thought, didn't you send him to a retirement ranch?" "I did," Jack said, his voice low. "And that's where everything went wrong." By the time Marcus's old truck pulled into the drive, the sun was climbing high, heat shimmering off the tin roof of the barn. Marcus climbed out, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair touched with gray, his hands still steady as stone. He carried a worn leather bag and a look that mixed both curiosity and concern. "Where is he?" Marcus asked. Jack led him inside. Red lifted his head weakly from the straw as Marcus approached, the horse's dull eyes narrowing at the stranger. Marcus crouched slowly, his movements calm, deliberate. He reached out, let Red catch his scent, then laid gentle hands along the horse's neck and shoulders. "Good boy," Marcus murmured, his voice soft, but certain. "Still has some fight left. I can feel it." Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, his stomach tight. He watched as Marcus ran careful hands along Red's ribs, pressed against his flank, checked his gums. Every touch seemed to reveal another layer of neglect, bones jutting sharp under skin, muscles wasted from disuse, dehydration carving lines across his body. "He's starving," Marcus said finally, straightening with a sigh. "Body condition score maybe a 2, if that. Malnourished for months, dehydrated, muscle atrophy. Jack, it's a miracle he's standing at all." Jack rubbed a hand over his face. "I thought I was giving him a better life." "Paid good money to that ranch. Trusted them." Marcus's eyes hardened. "Silver Creek?" Jack's head jerked up. "You've heard of them?" "More than heard. Had a client lose a mare there. She never came back. Place looked fine on the outside, but I never liked the feel of it." Marcus shook his head. "I should have warned you." A silence hung between them, heavy with regret and anger. Then Marcus crouched again, checking Red's eyes. "But he's not gone yet. If we're careful, if we take it slow, he's got a chance. No sudden feeding. We'll start with small amounts, steady hydration." "It'll be a long road, Jack." Jack nodded, gripping the stall rail. "Whatever it takes." Marcus glanced at him, a faint smile tugging the corner of his mouth. "Same stubborn fool I remember. Always did bite off more than you could chew." Jack let out a humorless laugh. "Difference is, this time I'm not letting him down." They worked together through the day, Marcus prepared a special mash, soft and easy to digest, while Jack carried buckets of clean water. Red took it slow, his muzzle nudging the bucket before he drank, each swallow careful and labored. The sound of it, simple, ordinary, filled Jack with an odd relief. In the afternoon, Marcus sat on a hay bale, scribbling notes. "We'll need to run blood work. I'll bring supplies tomorrow. For now, keep him comfortable, shaded, quiet. And Jack, don't expect quick miracles. His body's been through hell." Jack lowered himself onto the opposite hay bale, his elbows resting on his knees. "I'm not looking for miracles. Just want him to feel safe again." "He deserves that." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You know, you haven't changed much." Still wearing your guilt like a second skin, Jack looked away, jaw tight. "I should have known better." "Maybe," Marcus said gently, "but you're here now. That counts for something." As the evening shadows stretched long across the barn floor, Jack felt the weight of Marcus's words sink in. For the first time since he'd seen Red under that oak tree, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. When Marcus finally packed his bag and clapped Jack on the shoulder, he left behind more than medical advice. He left behind the reminder that Jack wasn't fighting alone. Red had his strength, fragile as it was. Jack had his will. And now, with Marcus back in the picture, he had an ally who knew both science and loyalty. After Marcus drove away, Jack returned to the stall. Red raised his head at the sound of his boots, those familiar eyes following him in the dim light. Jack reached over the stall door, brushing his hand along the horse's neck. "We're not done yet," he whispered. "Not by a long shot." Outside, the cicadas sang their endless chorus, and the night settled over the farm. But inside the barn, in the quiet shared between man and horse, something had shifted. The past was filled with betrayal. The future was uncertain. But in that moment, Jack knew one truth as solid as the earth beneath his boots. Red still trusted him, and he wouldn't break that trust again. The sun had long since dropped behind the rolling hills when Jack finally stepped out of the barn. The cicadas droned louder in the dark, and the humid air clung to his skin like a second layer. Red had eaten a little mash under Marcus's careful guidance, had drunk water in slow, deliberate swallows. He was far from strong, but there was a fragile steadiness in him now, like a candle flame that refused to die out. Still, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that danger lingered just beyond the fence line. He dragged an old lawn chair up beside the stall, set a thermos of coffee at his feet, and leaned his Winchester rifle against the door. It had been years since he'd sat guard like this, years since the rodeo days when long nights on the road sometimes meant fending off thieves who prowled fairgrounds. But the instinct came back quickly. Tonight wasn't about trophies or cattle. It was about a single horse whose life had been gambled away by people Jack had once trusted. The barn smelled of hay and sweat and faint antiseptic from Marcus's kit. Outside, the night pulsed with the rhythm of insects, the distant bark of a dog, and every so often, the lonely call of a whip poor will. Jack kept his eyes on the gravel drive that wound past the front gate, listening for something that didn't belong. Hours dragged by, the lantern's glow dimming. Jack's mind circled the same thoughts over and over, the brochure promising lifelong care, the hollow look in Red's eyes, Clara's quiet warning that this horse was more than just a forgotten animal. He thought of Marcus, too, of the way his friend had spoken with that mix of anger and caution when he'd named Silver Creek. Clearly others had suffered the same betrayal. Jack clenched his fists. He had spent too long believing his horse was safe, while the truth rotted beneath the surface. Just past midnight, the sound came. A low hum, mechanical, rolling in slow from the distance. Jack stiffened, leaning forward in his chair. The hum grew louder until the crunch of tires on gravel reached his ears. Headlights stayed dark. A truck moved along the road, creeping like a shadow through the fields. Red stirred in the stall, lifting his head, ears flicking toward the sound. He gave a soft, uneasy snort, as if confirming Jack's fears. The truck slowed near the gate. Jack rose silently, hands steady despite the racing of his heart. He grabbed the Winchester, stepped to the edge of the barn's shadow, and watched. A figure leaned out of the passenger window. He couldn't see details, only the silhouette of someone holding something. Camera, phone, binoculars? The shape glinted faintly in the starlight. Jack's breath hissed through his teeth. Whoever they weren't lost. They knew exactly where to look. He lifted the rifle, the steel cool and familiar in his grip, and fired a warning shot skyward. The report split the night like a lightning strike. The truck roared to life, engine screaming as it tore away down the road, gravel spraying. Within moments the hum faded, swallowed by the dark. Red let out another snort, tossing his head weakly, his eyes wide. Jack set the rifle aside and moved quickly to the stall, pressing a hand against the horse's neck to calm him. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "They won't touch you." "Not while I'm here." His own pulse thudded in his ears, but he forced his breathing to steady. The message was clear. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want Red alive, or at least didn't want him seen. Jack stayed awake until the first blush of dawn lit the horizon. The coffee had long gone cold, and his muscles ached from the tension of sitting still. But he refused to leave Red unguarded. Each sound of the night had sharpened his sense of purpose. He knew now this wasn't just about nursing an old horse back to health. It was about unraveling the lie that had nearly killed him. As the sun rose, painting the fields in a thin layer of gold, Jack looked down at Red, who had dozed again in the straw, his breathing slow but steady. Jack brushed his calloused fingers across the stall door. "We'll get through this, you and me," he said softly. "And whoever's out there, we'll find them." In that moment, Jack wasn't just making a promise to Red. He was swearing an oath into the morning air, an oath that would carry him into the fight ahead. The morning after the uneasy night broke hotter than most, the air heavy with the promise of a storm that never seemed to arrive. Jack leaned against the porch railing, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, his gaze fixed on the barn. Red was still inside, resting, though every so often Jack heard the faint scrape of hooves against straw as the horse shifted. The memory of the dark truck lingered in his mind. The silhouette of the figure at the window burned into him like a brand. Whoever they weren't just curious wanderers. They had been searching for Red, or confirming he still existed. Jack carried the weight of that thought with him as he headed back into the barn. Red greeted him with a soft nicker, the kind of sound that once had meant eagerness for training or feed, but now carried a fragile, weary tone. Jack knelt by his side, brushing a hand along his mane. "We'll keep you safe, old boy," he said. But even as the words left his lips, doubt gnawed at him. Clara arrived later in the morning, a basket of fresh eggs tucked under her arm, her eyes sharp as they swept across the property. "Saw tire tracks near the gate," she said, without preamble. "You had company last night, didn't you?" Jack nodded. "A truck." No lights. Someone leaning out the window. I scared them off, but they'll be back. Clara set the basket down on a bale of hay. That's what I was afraid of. They don't like their secrets crawling back into the light. Jack felt the words slice through him. I trusted those people, he muttered. Silver Creek. They had contracts, brochures, photographs. They looked me in the eye and told me he'd be cared for. I signed away his future because I believed them. Clara's expression softened. You're not the first, Jack. Won't be the last. They built their business on trust. Trust from folks like you who loved their horses but couldn't keep them. That trust is what let them get away with it. Jack clenched his fists. He could still see the moment he had handed Red's reins over years ago, his chest swelling with both sorrow and relief, convinced he was doing the right thing. He had carried that peace with him ever since, until the day he slammed on his brakes by the abandoned field. That peace had been a lie, and the realization hollowed him out. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned with his veterinary kit, his brow furrowed in concentration as he drew blood samples and checked Red's hydration. He's hanging on, Marcus said, wiping his hands on a rag. But Jack, I need to be straight with you. Horses that come back from this, they don't always recover fully. Even if we save him, he'll never be the same. Jack swallowed hard. I'm not asking him to be the same. I just want him to know he's not forgotten. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll fight for him. As the evening settled, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and brooding. Jack sat in the barn with Clara and Marcus, the three of them silent for a long while. The storm didn't break, but the air buzzed with tension, like a wire stretched too tight. Finally, Clara spoke. You have to understand, Jack. If Red survived, that means there are others who didn't. Horses people paid to protect, just like you did. But no one talks about it. No one wants to believe they were betrayed. Jack's gaze dropped to the dirt floor. Betrayal. That word echoed through him, heavier than the rifle he had held the night before. He had been betrayed, yes, but more than that, he had betrayed Red. He had walked away, trusted strangers to keep a promise, and let his horse waste away to skin and bone. He felt something fracture inside him, sharp and final. The blind faith he had once carried was gone, shattered like glass. What replaced it was raw, simmering resolve. I won't let it stand, Jack said quietly, his voice rough with conviction. Not just for Red. For every horse they left to die. Clara and Marcus exchanged a glance. Neither spoke, but both understood that something had shifted. Jack was no longer just a farmer trying to save his horse. He had become a man with a mission, and missions like his drew enemies out of the shadows. That night, as lightning flickered faintly on the far-off horizon, Jack returned to his chair beside Red's stall. He didn't sleep, not because he feared another truck creeping past, but because he knew this was the moment his life had changed. The trust he once had was gone. In its place was a vow to fight until the truth was unearthed, no matter the cost. Red stirred, his eyes catching the lantern glow, and for the briefest instant, Jack thought he saw the old fire return. It was faint, but it was there, like a reminder that even broken trust could be rebuilt, not through contracts or promises, but through action, loyalty, and the courage to stand when others faltered. The storm never came. By dawn, the clouds had drifted apart, leaving the Oklahoma sky washed clean and brittle blue. Jack stepped outside, the ground damp with dew but not rain, the air thick with silence. He'd been awake all night, every nerve stretched thin. His body begged for rest, but his mind would not allow it. Too many questions clawed at him. Who had been watching, what they wanted, and how deep Silver Creek's betrayal truly ran. The first sign of pressure came in the simplest form: a note. Jack found it pinned to his mailbox with a bent nail, the paper crumpled, the words scrawled in ink that had bled from morning dew. Stop asking questions. Forget the horse. Some things are better left buried. His fist tightened around the note until it tore, the paper trembling in his hands. Clara, who had walked over from her place, read it over his shoulder. "They know," she said grimly. "They're watching you." Jack swallowed his anger, his voice low. "Let them watch." "I'm not stopping." Still, the message rattled him. He thought about Red in the barn, too weak to defend himself, relying on Jack's promise. He thought about the nights he'd left Red in the hands of strangers, believing in glossy images of pastures and promises. The note wasn't just a threat. It was a reminder of how vulnerable they were. Later that morning, Marcus arrived in his dusty truck, carrying more supplies. He took one look at Jack's face and asked, "Rough night?" Jack handed him the torn note. Marcus read it, his jaw tightening. "You need to be careful. These people aren't just neglectful. They're covering something, and they've got money to lose." Jack shook his head. "They've already taken enough. I won't give them this horse, too." By afternoon, the pressure grew heavier. A black SUV rolled slowly down the road, windows tinted, engine humming low. It didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. But Jack felt the weight of its presence. Clara, who had come to help with chores, caught sight of it too. "They're circling," she said. "Testing you. Seeing if you'll fold." That evening, Jack found a second warning. This time it wasn't words. It was a dead crow, laid neatly on his porch, wings outstretched, its lifeless eyes staring toward the barn. The message was clear. Accidents could happen. Jack burned it in the fire pit, his face set hard against the flames. He knew fear was the tool they used, but anger was becoming his answer. In the barn, Red stirred uneasily. Even in his frail state, the horse seemed to sense the tension, ears flicking at every sound, muscles quivering at shadows. Jack stayed with him, brushing his coat, whispering reassurance. "They'll try to scare us, boy. But we've been through worse." We're still standing. Clara sat on a hay bale, watching. "You can't do this alone," she said softly. "You need help. People who can put this story into the light where shadows can't reach." Jack knew she was right, but the thought of exposing Red, parading him as proof, twisted his gut. Yet the threats were mounting, and silence was no longer safety. That night, he heard the hum of another engine. This time it didn't pass. It slowed outside the gate, tires crunching gravel, lingering just long enough for Jack's pulse to pound in his ears. He grabbed the Winchester, stepped onto the porch, and shouted into the dark, "You're not welcome here!" The vehicle revved, headlights flaring on for a blinding moment, then disappeared into the distance. Jack stood there long after it was gone, the rifle heavy in his hands, the cool, night air thick with unease. Inside, Red shifted and snorted, as if echoing Jack's defiance. Jack lowered the rifle, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "They want us afraid, boy. But I won't break." Not this time. He looked out into the dark fields beyond his fence, knowing the fight was only beginning, the pressure only growing. But beneath the fear, there was steel in his bones, the kind forged by betrayal and sharpened by loyalty. And for the first time in years, Jack felt not just like a farmer, but like the cowboy he used to be. A man who stood his ground when no one else would. The sky over Oklahoma had the strange stillness that comes before a storm, though the air remained dry. Jack could feel it in his bones, a shift in the world around him, the kind that made the land hold its breath. He sat in his old chair by Red's stall, rifle propped against his leg, a thermos of coffee cooling at his feet. He hadn't slept much since the crow on the porch. The image of its wings spread open, its dead eyes fixed on the barn, still clung to him like smoke that wouldn't wash away. Red stirred on the straw, his ears flicking at every small sound. Though weak, the horse was alert in ways Jack hadn't seen before, watchful, wary, as if he too understood they were being hunted. Jack reached over the stall door, brushing a hand against the horse's neck. "We've fought battles together before," he whispered. "This is just another one." The night deepened. Crickets chirped, then fell silent. An owl hooted from a tree line. Then all at once the world seemed to grow too quiet. Jack leaned forward, heart thudding in his chest. That was when he heard it, the low rumble of a truck engine, creeping down the dirt road with headlights off. He slipped the rifle into his hands and stood. The beam of moonlight glinted off the barrel as he stepped to the barn's edge. Gravel crunched. The truck slowed near the gate. For a moment it sat there, engine idling, a shadow against the darkness. Jack could make out two figures inside. One leaned out the window, holding something shiny, maybe a camera, maybe a gun. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, finger tight on the trigger. But then Red snorted, a deep, guttural sound that snapped Jack's attention. The horse pawed at the ground, ears pinned, his body trembling not just with weakness but with a kind of defiance. It was as if Red were telling him not to waste the bullet. Not yet. The truck inched forward, then stopped again. Jack's breath caught. He fired a single round into the air, the echo tearing through the stillness. The truck's engine roared, tires spitting gravel as it spun away into the night, swallowed by dust. For a long while, Jack stood motionless, the rifle heavy in his hands, the smell of gunpowder hanging sharp in the air. Red's breathing was fast, eyes wide. Jack returned to the stall, laying a hand against the horse's warm shoulder. "Easy, boy. It's just noise. They're gone for now." But even as he spoke, he knew they weren't gone. Whoever they were testing him, pushing him, waiting for the right moment. The hours crawled by until the first pale light bled across the horizon. Dawn usually brought Jack peace, the sound of roosters crowing, the shimmer of dew on fields, the slow rhythm of a farm waking up. But this dawn carried no peace. His eyes stung from exhaustion, and his chest felt tight with the weight of promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Clara appeared just after sunrise, carrying a thermos of her own. She set it on the fence post and studied Jack with weary eyes. "You didn't sleep." "No," Jack admitted. "Neither did they." He nodded toward the road. She followed his gaze, saw the fresh tire marks in the dirt. Her face hardened. "They won't stop." "Not until they get what they want, or until you make too much noise for them to ignore." Jack sipped the bitter coffee, his hands shaking slightly. "Then maybe it's time to make noise." But inside, doubt gnawed at him. Making noise meant exposing Red, turning his suffering into evidence. Was it fair to drag the horse into the fight? Red deserved rest, not the blinding glare of a battle that might consume them both. As if sensing his hesitation, Red lifted his head and looked at Jack, those familiar eyes steady despite the exhaustion. In that gaze, Jack found his answer. This wasn't just about one horse anymore. Red was a symbol of every broken promise, every betrayal hidden behind polished brochures and false words. Jack turned back to Clara, his voice steady now. It's time to find someone who will listen. Someone who can put this where the shadows can't reach. The sun broke over the horizon, lighting the fields in gold. Red let out a soft nicker, almost like approval. Jack laid his hand against the stall door, the wood rough beneath his palm. Darkness doesn't last forever, he said, but it fights hardest before the dawn. By the second morning, Jack's nerves felt frayed to threads. He had spent 2 nights awake with his rifle and coffee, watching shadows crawl along the gravel road, listening for engines that might return. Red had eaten a little more, drank more water, but every step still looked like it might buckle beneath him. The horse's survival felt fragile, like a flame cupped against the wind. Jack knew he couldn't keep this fight quiet any longer. If Silver Creek had the power to send men prowling at night, then silence was no longer a shield. It was a trap. Clara had been the first to say it out loud. You need a voice bigger than this farm, Jack. Someone who can turn one horse's story into something no one can bury. She'd leaned on the stall rail, her eyes sharp. The press is the only thing they can't control. Jack resisted at first. The thought of strangers swarming his farm, cameras flashing at Red in his frail state, it felt like another betrayal. Red deserved dignity, not headlines. But then the image of that crow on his porch rose again, its wings stiff, its death used as a message. The men in the truck would come back, and next time they might not just leave warnings. So Jack made the call. Emily Torres met him in town 2 days later, at the small cafe that served as the community's gathering place. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon, ceiling fans clacking overhead. Emily slid into the booth across from him, notepad already in hand. She was younger than Jack expected, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, eyes bright with a kind of restless determination. You said you have something, she began. Jack studied her carefully. She wasn't part of the old rodeo crowd. She hadn't seen Red in his glory days, hadn't witnessed the trophies or the partnership they'd shared. But maybe that was better. Maybe she could see the truth, without nostalgia clouding it. I have a horse, Jack said slowly. A horse I trusted to a retirement ranch years ago. Paid them to care for him. Promised him a good life. But I found him starving in an abandoned field. He slid the tarnished Silver Creek tag across the table. That's where he was supposed to be. Silver Creek Ranch. Ever heard of it? Emily picked up the tag, turned it in her fingers. I've heard whispers. Complaints, but nothing anyone's been willing to go on record about. You're saying this horse is proof? Yes, Jack said. He's alive, but barely. He shouldn't be. Not after what they did. And I think there are others. Clara Johnson, neighbor of mine. She's seen trucks at night. Marcus Lee, a vet, says Red's condition shows months of neglect. But no one's listening to them. Emily tapped her pen against the notepad, eyes narrowing. Why now? Why come to me? Jack leaned forward, his voice low, steady. Because I've had trucks outside my farm at night. Notes telling me to stay quiet. Dead animals left on my porch. They want this story buried, which means it needs to be told. For a moment, the cafe noise seemed to fade. Emily's expression sharpened, resolve settling into her features. All right. I'll see him. If this horse is what you say he is, then you've got yourself a story. They drove back to the farm that afternoon. The sky stretched wide and pale above the fields, the heat pressing down heavy. Jack's stomach twisted as they pulled into the drive. He wasn't sure how Red would look to someone who hadn't known him before. To Jack, every movement carried echoes of who the horse had been, every flick of his ear, every weary blink. But would Emily see a champion or just a half-broken animal? Inside the barn, Red lifted his head slowly as they entered. His coat was still dull, ribs still sharp, but his eyes, those eyes, met Jack's first, then shifted to Emily. Emily froze, her pen forgotten in her hand, but stepped closer, careful, as though approaching something sacred. "Good God," she whispered. "How is he even standing?" Jack's chest tightened. "Because he's Red, strongest horse I've ever known. And because he trusts me, even after everything." Emily crouched, scribbling notes with one hand, snapping a picture with her phone in the other. She moved slowly, respectfully, documenting without intruding. "This is bigger than one horse," she said. "If Silver Creek let him waste away like this, then they're lying to dozens of owners. Maybe hundreds?" Jack nodded grimly. "That's what I'm afraid of." Emily looked up at him, eyes fierce. "Then let's make them afraid instead." For the first time since he'd found Red beneath that oak tree, Jack felt something shift inside him. Not just anger or guilt, but momentum. Red wasn't only his fight anymore. With Emily, with Clara, with Marcus, this battle had a voice that could carry beyond the fences of his farm, beyond the shadows of trucks prowling in the night. Still, as he stroked Red's neck that evening, Jack couldn't shake the gnawing fear. Bringing the press into this meant stepping out of the barn's dim safety and into a storm of attention. Silver Creek wouldn't take it lightly. The threats would grow. The shadows would lengthen. But Red lifted his head, ears twitching toward the sound of the cicadas, eyes catching the lantern light. Jack saw in them the same glimmer he'd seen in the arena years ago, the silent challenge to face whatever came. Jack rested his forehead against Red's mane, the scent of dust and sweat filling his lungs. "All right, old friend," he whispered. "We're in it now. No turning back." Emily Torres returned to the farm the next day, notepad tucked under her arm, her phone charged and ready. She moved with the brisk determination of someone chasing a lead that might blow open more than just a single headline. Jack watched her climb out of her dusty sedan, the heat of late morning shimmering off the hood. He still felt uneasy about exposing Red, but the choice had already been made. Silence was no longer an option. Emily set up her notes on the hood of the car. "I've been digging since we talked. Silver Creek isn't just neglectful. They're ghosts. Their phone lines are disconnected. Their website hasn't been updated in over a year. But the most damning thing? I found a former employee willing to talk." Jack's stomach tightened. "And?" "She claims Silver Creek closed its doors months ago. Officially, they said financial trouble. Unofficially, she said they skimmed money until it dried up. Horses were either abandoned, sold at auction, or worse." Emily's eyes darkened. "She gave me records, at least pieces of them. Horses identified by numbers, not names, some listed as liquidated." The word hung heavy in the air, sour in Jack's ears. He thought of Red standing in the stall behind him, the way his body had trembled from weakness, and felt rage coil in his chest. "Liquidated," he spat, "like they were nothing more than inventory." Emily nodded grimly. "That's exactly how they treated them." She pulled out a folded sheet of paper and handed it to him. "Here. This is part of their log. Do you see this?" Her finger tapped a line of faded print. "Number SC1097. Sorrel gelding. Marked with a white blaze down the face. Status: liquidated. Jack's breath caught. The description was unmistakable. His knees weakened, and for a moment he had to brace himself against the truck. "That's Red," he said hoarsely. "That's him." They marked him for slaughter. Emily's eyes softened, but her pen kept moving. "Then we have more than a story. We have evidence." Inside the barn, Clara had been listening, her arms folded tight across her chest. "I told you," she said quietly. "Red's survival isn't luck. It's a mistake. He slipped through their cracks. Someone out there is furious about that Marcus arrived later that afternoon, bringing supplies for Red's recovery. When Emily showed him the documents, his face hardened. "I've seen horses vanish into those auctions," he said. "Owners think their animals are safe, but a few months later the horses are gone." No one asks questions, because no one wants to know the answers. Jack clenched the papers until they wrinkled in his fists. "Well, I want answers. And I want the whole damn country to know the truth." That evening, Emily sat with her laptop at Jack's kitchen table, typing as fast as her fingers could fly. The clatter of keys filled the room, underscored by the soft hum of cicadas outside. Clara made coffee, while Marcus leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his expression grave. Jack paced the room, his boots thudding against the worn floorboards. Finally, Emily looked up. "The first draft is done. It's not just Red's story. It's the story of every horse marked like inventory, every owner who paid to give their animals peace and instead gave them to death." Jack sank into the chair across from her. "Do you think people will listen?" Emily held his gaze, her voice steady. "They'll have no choice. Once this runs, Silver Creek can't hide behind brochures and websites anymore." But even as the words left her mouth, the night pressed closer. Jack couldn't shake the memory of the trucks idling outside his farm, the crow on his porch, the note nailed to his mailbox. The shadows weren't gone. If anything, they were thickening. When Emily left just before midnight, Jack walked her to her car. The gravel crunched beneath their boots, the cool night wind stirring dry grass along the ditch. She opened the driver's door, but paused. "Be careful, Jack," she said. "Stories like this, they draw blood before they draw light." Jack nodded, his eyes drifting back toward the barn where Red slept. "I've got more to lose than just ink on a page." She gave him a long look, then slid into her car and drove away, her tail lights glowing red, until they vanished into the dark. Jack stood in the driveway, the papers still clutched in his hand, the night whispering around him. For the first time, he realized the battle was no longer just about saving Red. It was about dragging the truth out of the shadows, even if it meant stepping into danger himself. The morning broke clear and cool, a rare mercy after weeks of unrelenting Oklahoma heat. Dew clung to the grass, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth. Jack stood at the barn door, sipping coffee that had long gone lukewarm, his eyes fixed on Red. For days the horse had struggled even to rise, his body too frail to support the weight of his own history. Every attempt ended in trembling legs and a collapse back into the straw. Each fall had chipped at Jack's resolve, leaving him afraid to hope. But that morning, something was different. Red stirred before Jack even stepped into the stall, ears twitching toward him, eyes brighter than they had been since the day he found him under that oak tree. Jack opened the door cautiously, careful not to crowd him. Red shifted, legs sliding beneath him. For a heartbeat, Jack feared another collapse. But then the horse pushed harder, muscles straining, ribs quivering under paper-thin skin. Inch by inch, with a guttural grunt that echoed through the barn, Red lifted himself upright. Jack froze, coffee mug slipping from his grasp and shattering on the floor. "Easy, boy," he whispered, voice trembling. "Take it slow." Red stood, legs unsteady but locked in place, his head high for the first time in months. His chest heaved, nostrils flaring, but there was pride in the set of his neck, defiance in the flick of his tail. For Jack, it was like watching a ghost step out of the grave. He felt his eyes burn, his throat tighten, but he didn't move closer, afraid to break the fragile magic of the moment. Clara, who had been helping clean stalls, dropped her broom with a clatter. "Oh, my lord," she breathed. "He's standing." Marcus had arrived just in time to see it. He stood in the doorway, stethoscope hanging around his neck, eyes wide with disbelief. "I didn't think he had it in him yet," he said softly. "This is remarkable." Jack stepped closer then, slow and reverent, as if approaching the Red he had known years ago. He reached out, laid his hand against the horse's damp shoulder. "That's it, partner." "That's the fight I remember." Red flicked an ear toward his voice, then let out a low, throaty nicker. The sound reverberated through Jack like a song from the past. In that moment, every trophy, every arena, every roaring crowd faded into insignificance. This was victory. Not a ribbon or a check, but a horse's refusal to surrender. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, and even Marcus, steady and clinical, cleared, his throat as though to swallow his own. "Jack," he said, "you realize what this means?" He's turning a corner. It's not just survival anymore. He's choosing to live. Jack nodded, unable to speak. His hand never left Red's shoulder, grounding them both. As the morning stretched on, Red remained on his feet, even taking a tentative step forward. The movement was shaky, his legs trembling, but he did not fall. Instead, he pawed lightly at the straw, as if to test the strength returning to him. Jack's chest swelled with pride. "Let him walk a little," Marcus advised gently. "But keep it short. He's not ready for more." Jack led Red out into the paddock, the sunlight washing over his faded coat. For the first time in nearly a year, the horse stood outside with his head lifted to the sky. He blinked against the light, then sniffed at the grass, pawing at it before cropping a few tentative bites. His tail swished once, then again, and Jack laughed through his tears. Clara clasped her hands together. "He looks like himself again." Just for a moment. But it's there. Jack nodded. "And that's enough." The sight of Red standing strong rippled through Jack's soul. It wasn't just a physical recovery. It was a declaration. Against abandonment, against betrayal, against the death that had been marked for him, Red had risen. That night, Jack sat once again by the stall, lantern glowing soft against the wood. Red lay down to rest, but Jack no longer saw fragility alone. He saw resilience, a stubborn fire that mirrored his own. He whispered into the quiet, "We're not done, old friend. This fight, it's bigger than us now. But you reminded me today that we can still stand outside," the cicadas sang, and the stars stretched endlessly across the black sky. For the first time since this ordeal began, Jack felt something stronger than fear pressing against his ribs. He felt hope, real, solid, undeniable. And in Red's triumph, he knew their story was only beginning to gather the strength it needed to shake the world awake. The article ran on a Thursday morning. Emily Torres had promised Jack that her words would cut through the noise, and she delivered. The front page of the county paper carried a headline that pulled no punches. From retirement to ruin. Horses betrayed by Silver Creek Ranch. Below it was a stark photo of Red, taken quietly while he stood in the stall, his ribs jutting, his coat dull, but his eyes alive. That single image carried more weight than paragraphs of text could. It was proof. By noon, Jack's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters from bigger outlets called, each wanting a quote, a picture, another angle. Neighbors drove by slow, their cars clogging the narrow dirt road, some offering words of support, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Clara fielded questions at the farm gate, her voice sharp as she kept the gawkers from pushing too close. Marcus kept his focus on Red, checking vitals, making sure the sudden attention didn't undo the fragile progress they had made. But Emily's piece wasn't just about Red. She had dug deeper, and the paper spread across the diner counters and gas station racks told a broader story. Silver Creek was just one of several ranches across the region that had operated under the same model. Money up front, glossy promises, and then silence. The former employee she interviewed had provided documents, coded logs of horses listed not by name but by physical description, many marked as relocated or liquidated. She explained what those words meant in practice: auctions, transport trucks, slaughter. The effect was immediate. Calls flooded into the sheriff's office, to the state agriculture department, even to local television stations. People wanted to know what had happened to their animals, wanted to know if the same betrayal had touched them. Jack sat on the porch, the paper open in his lap, staring at Red's photograph. He didn't feel pride. He felt anger sharpened into steel. His horse had survived, yes, but dozens more hadn't. And the men who had built this system were still out there, counting their money, maybe already opening new facilities under different names. That evening, Emily returned to the farm with her laptop bag slung over her shoulder and exhaustion in her eyes. She sat up at Jack's kitchen table, coffee in hand, her screen filled with emails. "It's bigger than I thought," she admitted. "Silver Creek wasn't alone. I've traced at least 4 other facilities in New Mexico and Texas with the same pattern. They pop up, run for a few years, close down suddenly, and vanish. Same brochures, same promises." Clara, who had been listening from the counter, slammed her palm against the wood. "So they just keep stealing money, killing horses, and moving on? And nobody stops them?" Emily looked up, her voice grim. "Not yet. But with this out in the open, they can't stay hidden." Jack stared at the wall, his jaw clenched. "We've given them light. Now, it's time for heat." The following days blurred into a storm. National outlets picked up the story, some calling Emily directly, others trying to reach Jack himself. News vans appeared on the dirt road, cameras pointed toward his farm. For the first time in years, Jack felt the outside world crash into his quiet life. Red, frail but standing, became the unwilling face of a movement. Hashtags spread online, photos circulated. People demanded answers. But the attention came with new threats. One night, Jack found his mailbox torn from the ground and tossed into the ditch. Another evening, Clara spotted a man parked down the road, engine idling, staring through binoculars. By the time Jack reached for the rifle, the truck was gone. Marcus urged caution, but Jack only tightened his resolve. Emily uncovered more. Bank records pointing to a man named Russell Kane, the supposed owner of Silver Creek. He had vanished a year earlier, leaving behind unpaid bills and empty barns. But his name appeared again in documents tied to another retirement facility 2 states away. The scheme wasn't just negligence, it was organized fraud. Jack read every word Emily showed him, the fire in his chest growing hotter with each revelation. Betrayal no longer felt personal. It was systemic, a network that fed off trust and loyalty, chewing up animals that had given their lives in service. One evening, as the cicadas droned and Red rested in his stall, Jack stood outside with Emily and Clara. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and violet, the kind of beauty that mocked the ugliness they were uncovering. Jack's voice was low, steady, almost a growl. "This isn't about me anymore, or even just about Red. This is about every horse they threw away. We take this fight further. We don't stop until the whole damn network is exposed." Emily closed her laptop with a sharp click. "Then you'd better be ready, Jack. Because the deeper we dig, the harder they'll push back." Red lifted his head, ears flicking at the sound of their voices, and let out a soft, rumbling nicker. It carried across the paddock like a vow of its own. Jack looked at the horse, then back at his friends. "Let them push. We'll push harder." By the time the second week rolled in, the story had spread far beyond the borders of Oklahoma. What started as a small-town article had ignited like dry prairie grass under a lightning strike. National outlets picked it up. Animal welfare groups shared it on every platform. And the photo of Red, frail but defiant, was now everywhere. Hashtags flooded social media, and phone calls poured into Jack's farmhouse until he stopped answering altogether. His voicemail filled with voices he didn't know, some offering support, others demanding answers, a few leaving threats laced with venom. Emily's story had struck a nerve. Horse owners from across the country began writing in, telling their own accounts of retirement facilities that had vanished, horses that had disappeared, money gone without explanation. Some had long suspected the truth, but lacked proof. Now, with Red's survival as a symbol, their suspicions had form and weight. Jack watched it unfold with a mix of awe and unease. He wasn't used to attention. He'd lived his life with calloused hands and dirt under his nails, known more by the strength of his back than the sound of his name. Now, strangers stopped him at the feed store, thanking him for speaking out, asking if Red could be visited, photographed, turned into something bigger. Jack always said no. Red wasn't a prop. He was a survivor, and Jack wouldn't let him be reduced to anything less. But the fire kept spreading. State legislators began calling for hearings. Animal welfare groups launched petitions. News anchors on polished sets spoke his name, showed Red's photo, and used words like systemic fraud and national scandal. Jack sat at his kitchen table one evening, watching the television flicker, his face lit in shades of blue. Clara poured coffee beside him, shaking her head in disbelief. "You wanted the truth in the light," she murmured. "Well, now the whole country's staring straight at it." Yet with fire came smoke, and smoke drew enemies. Jack noticed trucks idling longer near his property. Once, someone threw a brick through his mailbox, wrapped in paper scrawled with the words, "Shut up or else." He burned it in the fire pit without telling Clara. She'd already lost sleep over the crow on the porch. No use adding another weight to her shoulders. Red, meanwhile, seemed to grow stronger each day. He walked slowly around the paddock now, his coat beginning to shine again, though scars of malnutrition lingered. Marcus checked him daily, cautiously optimistic. "He's not out of the woods," Marcus warned, "but he's making progress I didn't expect. That horse has a will stronger than most men I know." Jack often stood at the fence line, watching Red graze in the evening light. He thought about all the animals that hadn't made it, the ones reduced to lines in coated logs. Their owners might never see them again. Red's survival was a miracle, but it was also a responsibility. Jack knew he carried their stories now, too. Emily worked tirelessly, filing follow-up articles, connecting with whistleblowers, and uncovering links between facilities across state lines. One night, she arrived at the farm with a folder thick with documents. She spread them across Jack's table. Bank records, shell companies, names tied to the same fraud repeated over and over. Jack studied the papers, each line another nail in the coffin of his old trust. "This isn't just one ranch," Emily said. "It's a network, operating across 3 states at least. They take the money, run the facilities just long enough to look legitimate, then disappear. Horses vanish. Owners never get answers." Jack clenched his jaw. Until now. The fire was no longer just public outrage, it was becoming political. Legislators announced investigations. Activists organized rallies. Jack even received letters from children, their handwriting shaky but sincere. "Thank you for saving Red. Horses deserve love." He kept those letters in a shoebox by his bed, opening them at night when the threats weighed heavier than his courage. Still, he knew the more the fire spread, the closer the danger crept. His phone buzzed late one evening with a message from an unknown number. "Beautiful horse you've got. Shame if something happened to him." Jack stared at the words until the letters blurred, then deleted the message without reply. But when he walked to the barn that night, lantern swinging, Red was already standing by the gate, ears pricked, eyes sharp, as if he too sensed the storm gathering. Jack leaned. Against the fence, the night heavy around them. "They're coming for us, boy," he murmured. "But we've got more with us now than against us." Red tossed his head, mane catching the lantern light, and gave a sharp snort. Jack smiled despite the chill crawling up his spine. The horse was ready. So was he. The fire had spread, and there was no putting it out. 6 months later, the land carried a different sound. Where once there had been silence heavy with fear, now there was the steady rhythm of hoofbeats in the paddock, the laughter of children visiting the farm, and the quiet hum of voices that came not with threats, but with gratitude. The firestorm of publicity had cooled into something steadier. Action. Laws were being written, hearings were underway, and the names of men who had once hidden in the shadows now filled headlines under the word indicted. Jack leaned against the fence, the wood warm beneath his arms, and watched Red move across the pasture. The horse wasn't the same as he had been in the arenas years ago. His gait was slower, his joints stiff with age and damage. But he carried himself with dignity. His coat had regained its copper shine. His eyes were bright. And when he saw Jack, he gave a low nicker that still held the old fire. Clara stood nearby, her face softened by the glow of the setting sun. Marcus had stopped by earlier, checking Red with the careful thoroughness of a man who had learned never to underestimate resilience. Emily was there too, leaning on the fence with her ever-present notepad, though now she wrote less for headlines and more for the book she said she would one day finish. The small group that had once whispered in barns and kitchens had become something larger. Family-bound not by blood, but by a cause that had demanded everything of them. The movement had grown beyond Jack's fence line. Across the country, horses that had once been listed as gone were being found. Some in shelters, some at auctions, a few in pastures where strangers had taken them in without knowing their worth. There were heartbreaks, yes, stories that ended too soon. But there were also reunions that brought tears and cheers, photographs of people pressing their faces into the necks of horses they thought lost forever. Red's survival had lit a beacon, and others had found their way to it. As the sun dipped lower, streaking the plains with orange and violet, Jack stepped into the paddock. Red trotted toward him, ears pricked, his tail swishing lazily. When he reached Jack, he pressed his head into the man's chest, the way he had always done in quiet moments after the dust of competition settled. Jack wrapped his arms around the strong neck, burying his face in the coarse mane. "You saved more than yourself, boy," Jack murmured. "You saved them all. You showed the world what loyalty looks like, what it means to stand even when everything's been taken." Red snorted softly, as if in agreement, then nudged Jack's pocket for the peppermint he knew would be there. Jack chuckled, pulling one out and placing it flat on his palm. Red's lips brushed his skin as he took it, crunching happily, the sound both ordinary and extraordinary. The horizon burned brighter for a moment, the light casting long shadows that stretched across the fields. Jack looked at them and felt something he hadn't known in years. Peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of knowing he had faced the darkness and brought something back into the light. Emily closed her notebook with a snap. "When I write this ending," she said, "I want people to know it wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about redemption. Yours, his, and ours." Jack smiled faintly. "Call it what you like. To me, it's just about keeping a promise." The air cooled as the sun sank, the sky fading from fire to indigo. Jack walked back toward the barn with Red at his side, their steps falling into the same rhythm they had always known. Behind them, Clara and Emily followed, talking quietly about tomorrow's plans, while Marcus's truck pulled out of the drive, headlights sweeping the fields one last time before vanishing down the dirt road. At the barn door, Jack paused, looking back at the horizon. The fight wasn't over. Not really. There would always be battles to fight, voices to raise, promises to keep. But in that moment, with Red beside him and the plains alive with the sound of life instead of silence, Jack felt whole. "Come on, partner," he said softly, patting the horse's neck. "Let's go home." And together they stepped inside, shadows long behind them, the bond between man and horse unbroken, unshaken, and everlasting. Red's story reminds us that loyalty should never be forgotten. And sometimes, the greatest victories are simply surviving together. If this touched your heart, drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments to show you're here with us. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell, because more incredible true stories of humans and animals are coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next.